welcome to the Biz Coach Show, hosted by my Biz Coaches and presented by the TLG Group. Our show is focused on giving entrepreneurs the edge they need to succeed. Your hosts today are David Macon, that's me, and Eric Whitmore. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you, David.
Awesome. Fantastic. Eric, always good to be with you. And let's take a minute to meet our guests for today's show. Our guest today is Chris Poese, Business Development Manager at PayEntry. Chris is a software as a service specialist with a passion for helping small businesses. Chris believes that small businesses are the backbone of our country, and the people running them should be able to focus on what they do best, reduce costs where they're able, and scale their businesses accordingly to support their local communities. Learn more at payentry.com. Chris, we're super excited to have you on the show with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's Friday. It's been a wonderful day. Just got a guy. Finally, I've been working with this guy for a long time, and he finally pulled the trigger, and pulling him off of a PEO going to save him about $14,000 a year.
Oh, wow. Awesome. That is a good day. That's a great way to wrap up your week, huh?
It's so good. He's been just kind of putting it off, but finally today he's like, okay, let's do this. So real excited.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, glad we can celebrate that with you, and awesome to have you on the show with us. Before we jump into our topic for today, we do want to invite our audience out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening through your podcast player of choice, take a minute to subscribe. We don't want to have you miss future episodes where we have great guests like Chris that join us, and we talk about a lot of topics related to small business, scaling your business, and a lot of things in between. So take a minute to subscribe. And speaking of our topic for today, we're going to be talking about Painless Payroll. And before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of that, Chris, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story, both your experience as a small business operator and owner, and also your experience on the software as a service side. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of telling us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So my business that I ran was a small gym. I was a CrossFit coach for years, and ran a small gym in San Jose. Very competitive area. I could have used a business coach at the time, but learned a lot at the same time. You know, and my wife and I, we decided that it was just going to be rough for us to try to start a family and buy a house in the Bay Area. So we decided to move out to Phoenix, Arizona. Kind of stumbled into the software as a service area. I was selling property management and accounting software, and then moved on to some water management and flooding software and hardware as a service. And then I found myself in payroll. And, you know, it's such a fun industry. It really is. It's something that I think is overlooked by a lot of business owners about having, you know, a good payroll partner in place.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that. It's a fun place to be. I think for a lot of business owners, it's almost maybe more of a nightmare. So it's glad to hear that fresh perspective, and obviously what you do and how you do it helps make that process so much easier. So
exactly. And that's why I landed at PayEntry. You know, all the horror stories that you hear from some of the other providers out there where, you know, we believe in being a partner, not just a provider. And because we want you to succeed, we want you to be successful. And, you know, I could dive into the story of PayEntry and how we ended up where we are later on, but I mean, I could talk about this for hours.
Awesome. Well, I think you know, maybe a great place to start is with those payroll headaches. And so as you're working with, you know, different clients, maybe talk to us about some of the payroll headaches that you encounter as you're working with small businesses.
Yeah, good question. It kind of depends on who I'm talking to and what their current situation is. You know, I've found that there's a couple types of people, you know, and having been a business owner, I could say too that I tried too hard to wear too many different hats all at the same time, right? I wore the marketing hat, I wore the sales hat, I wore the payroll hat, I wore the internet or the social media hat, you know, I tried to do everything all at once. And you know what? That's not my specialty. My specialty was coaching and helping people get healthier, right? So that was what I needed to focus on and do. So I find that there's some people that I work with that are trying to do payroll on their own, you know, especially if they only have, you know, one or two employees and they're paying themselves. It can, even that small of a business can be really challenging, even if you're using a software like QuickBooks, because you're still responsible for the direct deposits. You're still responsible for remitting the taxes and filing those taxes. And, you know, that that requires you to stay on top of local laws and state laws and federal laws. And that's not your job. Your job is to do whatever you do best and let somebody else handle it, right? Just let somebody else handle it. So that's kind of the first person that I typically work with is the multi-hat person. And then some of the, I would say, slightly larger businesses, 10 to 50, sometimes even bigger, they're using another provider out there that they might be really frustrated with their support or their service, or there's constant mistakes, or they're having trouble getting a hold of somebody if they had any kind of questions. Confusing pricing structures. They don't know what they're paying for and why, and then a lot of hidden fees that come along with that. It can be extremely frustrating. So that's a lot of other people that I've worked with too, and they've had bad experiences with onboarding. Like they are working with 7 or 8 different people to try to get their system up and running or their data converted. It can be a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it sounds like you guys have a lot of ways to simplify that and make it less of a headache, which is really cool. I'd be curious, you talked just briefly about kind of legality and, the taxation and things like that. What are some of the mistakes that you see small business owners make when it comes to maybe some of those kind of compliance type issues?
Well, it's just staying on top of the laws, right? Being able to pay those taxes appropriately. We had a client out of Massachusetts. They were a husband-wife team. They did flooring and carpeting, and they thought they were doing everything right through QuickBooks, and they just weren't filing their taxes right. And then suddenly they get this notice from the IRS, and they owed $101,000 in back
Wow.
taxes and fines and penalties.
Jeez.
And it's like, that's life changing, right? That is absolutely 100% life changing. And luckily they were able to. What's that?
Not in a good way either.
No, not in a really bad way. Luckily, they were able to negotiate some of that down, because it's like they weren't really doing it out of malice. They just weren't doing it right, which is unfortunate. And so those are some of the challenges that you face, where you're not working with an expert or an organization where that's their sole purpose in life, is to understand those tax codes, both state, federally, and sometimes even locally. Because there are some areas too where you might have, it's Ohio and Pennsylvania, I believe, are the 2 states that typically have the local taxes, where your neighbor might have a different tax bracket than you do because they're in a different school district. And
Right.
it's up to the employer to know that and remit those taxes appropriately. It's not on the employee, it's on the business owner. So that's some of the challenges that we help with.
Yeah. And I would say that one of the challenges with that is, if you're a small business owner, and you referenced it yourself, Chris, when you're wearing all those hats, you're not good at any of them. You're doing what you absolutely need to do for that part of the business. So whether it's marketing efforts, or it's bookkeeping, or it's whatever it is, you're spending your time on those particular areas, but you're really not good at it. And you certainly don't know the level of depth and understanding. You don't have the depth of understanding you should have for those categories of business. And what we find with our coaching business is, often a client will they'll get involved, they'll start scaling up. There'll be, a husband and wife team, kind of like what you referenced, and they add a first employee, and then they add a second. They're debating between 1099 or W-2, and going through that, in there, and neither, most people don't have all the specifics on whether or not that's appropriate. But then it's like, well, I shy away from the W-2 because I got to worry about paying taxes. And then I get into it, and I start bringing them on, and I start paying it, and then I don't pay it right, or I don't pay it on time, and then I get stuck with the fees. And then, to your point, you have a situation where you think you're doing it right, and then all of a sudden you come and find out you got a huge tax bill because it wasn't done correctly.
Yeah, and then you got to hire an attorney or somebody to go negotiate for you. Yes. And the money just keeps going out the door.
And money alone, put the money aside, it's the stress and anxiety that comes with that. Oh, while you're still trying to run your business every day.
Yep.
Right. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot that goes into that. And I know when Chris and I met for the first time, and he told me about what PayEntry did, and obviously there's lots of payroll companies out there. And David, as you know, with all the different businesses I've had over the years, I've used different payroll services, and I've never had a great experience with most payroll companies. So, and I could go on for hours with horror stories, but just kind of confirming what Chris is saying, as a small business owner himself, experiencing it firsthand, kind of what it's like. And then some of the, we hear some of the horror stories of these other clients and what they had to go through, and how a payroll company could come in and make an impact like that, that's pretty substantial.
Mm-hmm. Well, and specifically having that small business in mind, right?
Yep.
We have dedicated client advocates and tax people that they can work with, as far as being able to answer some of those more challenging questions and how they're going to pay their employees. If you have employees in multiple states, sometimes that becomes an issue. Maybe a small business on the grand scale of things, but I have a client that has 52 employees, but they're in 14 states. Like, are you going to stay on top of
no way.
all 14 states and their local laws and state laws? No, it's not a chance. Like,
no, most of
somebody else handle it.
States.
Exactly. Yeah. And most people don't. I was working with a business owner the other day, and they didn't know their overtime laws. How do I?
Yeah.
So they had to look up their overtime laws, and that's just how it goes. You're not supposed to have to know that stuff. It's not your job.
Yeah. One other point I'll put in there as a plug, but what you mentioned earlier about the business owner needing advice. Like, what are the laws? What are the overtime laws in California versus Arizona, which is a place where we see a lot of that, right? And now with all the people working remotely, you got a lot of people working. You might have 4 or 5 different employees in different states. So I don't know the overtime law in each of those states. And in most cases, that business owner, if they don't use a payroll company, they're calling their accountant, who, by the way, is charging them a couple $100 an hour, at least $150, $200 an hour, to give them that guidance and insight. So, that's also whereas you guys offer that as part of the payroll service that you provide.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, we have some HR services built in,
right,
is part of just the monthly cost, and then we do offer an HR compliance package where you would be able to outsource your HR department. Again, depending on the size of your organization, it's always going to vary, and that just kind of comes down to having a conversation and figuring out what works best for the client.
Right, totally.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was checking out the PayEntry site and found, obviously you do way more than just payroll. So that's awesome. One of the things I saw was actually benefits. And I know, for a lot of small business owners, benefits, 401k, that can be very overwhelming. Maybe it's the first time you've ever, thought about that as your business is scaling, or it's your first time setting something like that up. It can be very daunting. So if we've got somebody listening and they're maybe thinking about that, where should they start?
That's a good question. Obviously I would say start with us, but gotta throw in that pitch, right?
Absolutely.
But I think it's important. I think too, it's important to understand our model. We don't really do a whole lot of, as business development managers, we don't do a whole lot of cold calling and pulling on doors. I mean, there is part of that, right? If I'm going out to dinner, I drop my business card off and ask to talk to the general manager, and it always drives my wife insane. But hey, it's what I do, right? Like, it's what I'm supposed to do. And but we go to market a lot through our partners. I'd say 90% of our business goes through partners, and there's different reasons for that, right? Working with benefits brokers who sell health insurance for a living to small groups or large groups, and we can kind of help insulate that book of business because we don't actively solicit our clients for those products. We have those products there, but they're there just in case, right? Like, we love to use them because it's all built in and integrated. But if we're working with partners, we definitely don't want to step on toes, and we don't want to bite the hands that feed us in that sense, if that makes sense. I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but so we do offer those types of products, and we love doing it with small businesses because then we can actually help them start, right? If they don't have anything in place, it's nice to be able to say, okay, well, what's your plan? Do you want to save some money on taxes? How do you want to do this? Do you want to help your employees save some money on taxes? Do you want to offer high deductible plans, or what do you want to do? And we can work with those small businesses and have it built under one roof and help them grow in that sense. And that helps with things like employee retention, right? I think employees these days are getting more and more benefit savvy, and they're understanding, okay, well, this job might not pay as much, but I pay much less out of pocket for these benefits than I would at this job where I'd make more money. So I'd actually be making more money if I go over here and take the less paycheck, but much better benefits and 401k matching, and so on and so forth. So the list just kind of goes on and on. So it's important to have those things in place. for these small businesses, especially as they're attempting to scale and they want to retain that top talent. So that's why we offer those types of things. Workers' comp, we have pay-as-you-go workers' comp, and people love that. Are you familiar with that concept?
I am, but it'd probably be great for our audience if you want to explore it a little more.
Yeah, you should
Yeah,
share.
so yeah, pay-as-you-go workers' comp. So workers' comp is typically when you're working with somebody, they say, well, how much do you think you're going to pay in payroll for the year? And then your workers' comp is based on that estimation. And then there's an audit at the end of the year where you can owe a lot more money. And so suddenly you get slapped with this massive bill because you underpaid into your workers' comp. So what we do is and it's not for all industries, but a lot of industries can do the pay as you go. It just kind of depends on what you do. But it's like the way it was described to me is imagine filling up your gas tank and then only paying as you use it. So like at the end of the week, when you actually pay your payroll, it looks at what your payroll costs are, and then it pulls the money out based on that actual payroll for workers' comp. Really interesting stuff. A lot of small businesses love it. It makes it a lot easier to kind of predict what your workers' comp is going to be.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'd not heard of that before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for most business owners, anything that increases predictability is generally a good thing, right? You can forecast things a little bit better when they're predictable. So that's awesome.
Well,
Right.
that's why people like working with us too. Our tagline is simple, predictable, and transparent, right? We want it to be really easy to estimate what your payroll is going to be on an annual basis because we don't have any hidden fees. There's no charges for quarterly filings, no charges for annual filings, no W-2 costs. I mean, there's no customer report costs. There's nothing outside of what we say for the monthly charges as far as hiring and onboarding, timekeeping, and payroll are concerned.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and you touched on something I think is really important. It was the retention, right, and attracting employees by having a robust benefits offering. I think that's something we see time and time again, especially demographics, Gen Z employees. Flexible work is usually at the top, kind of followed closely by benefits and well-being. And so having that as part of your solution to attract and retain employees is, I think, really critical. And if people have maybe shied away from that because it seems complicated to set up, it's great to know that there's partners out there that really simplify the process and provide various options for them to choose from.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's a lot of, I think it was called I just covered this the other day. Secure Act 2, I believe is what it's called, where the federal government changed some of the, they want people to be able to, I'm going to look it up right now because it's driving, Secure Act 2. So they changed the way that credits are offered for small businesses to set up retirement plans because they realized that so many people are getting a retirement age and they don't have any money saved because they've never had an option to. And so this is to encourage small businesses to start some of these plans to help their employees start saving money for retirement through either a simple IRA or a 401k. And there's a lot of tax credits right now that can make it free to start these programs up, like absolutely free.
Wow.
And and there's discounts over a certain period of time. Again, I'd have to look up the actual numbers, but it's like a 5-year program where the costs kind of slowly increase over that 5 years, so you can adjust and get people going right away.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, there's something else you mentioned, Chris, that I want to spend a little more time on. It was actually HR challenges. And again, just, PayEntry is so much more than just payroll, HR support, guidance. And I think for business owners, right, as you grow, those HR headaches grow with you, right? And more people, more problems, I think. So maybe
I think that's the phrase.
Maybe spend a minute on some of those HR challenges that the small business owners should be thinking about that maybe they're not.
The general rule of thumb that I've heard is that as you're growing, you want to have one dedicated HR person per 50 employees. That's kind of the generalized rule of thumb. Does everybody do that? No. I worked with a guy that was the HR department for a hospital. They had 330 employees and he was the only person. So he did the HR and payroll, right? I mean, talk about a headache for a hospital, right?
Yeah.
But great guy. He'd been doing it for like 35 years, so it was really no sweat to him at that point. But so that's kind of the general rule of thumb. But again, that kind of starts going into the area of expertise aspect of things, where all of our clients have access to what's called HR Quick Connect, where you can call in and talk to an HR person for 10-15 minutes and ask questions, right? Like, well, can I do this? What about that? Employee did this. How do I manage that? And they also have this access to HR Answers, which is a website with a bunch of copy and paste job descriptions, checklists for hiring, firing, things like that. So they have free access to this. But again, it kind of goes back to that legality side of it, and knowing what you can and can't do without going to Google and really trying to figure out what your problem is through Google, because you're not going to get the answer, right?
Right.
You type in one of my coworkers hit on another coworker, how do I handle this? Google's not going to give you an answer, right? You have to call an HR expert and get those answers. So again, stay in your lane, right? Let the experts in their fields do what they do to help you be successful, so you can focus on what you do best.
Yeah.
And does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Eric, I'll tee up for maybe some of your thoughts, but I know as I've worked with different clients, I am shocked by some of the practices that they have in place, whether it's, interview tactics, interview styles, just kind of like talent development initiatives. I mean, it's kind of staggering. I'll be having a conversation and kind of have to like replay it back. Like, did I hear what I think I heard? You really do that? That's what you ask in the interview, and just totally unaware of what kind of litigation that opens them up to.
Yeah,
So
you can't ask certain questions in an interview, and like if you don't know, you're opening yourself up to a lot of problems.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's where having that HR Quick Connect, somebody kind of on demand is amazing. So, Eric, anything like that you see as you're working with clients?
Well, and I'll go back, David, to our previous employer, and one of the as we grew that company, year one, I think we did $1 million, and I think we had 60 employees or something like that. And you were there, right? So, right, you were in the early days. I think you were hired before I was even. And when we started growing and scaling, which happened relatively quickly, I want to say year 2 and 3, we're up to almost 40 stores by year 3. And what we recognized really quickly was we would promote people based on performance, and usually it was sales performance directly. 95% of the people in the organization had a sales quota. So one of the things that I had known, having been in the industry for about a dozen years before coming to this company, was you can promote on sales performance, and that's certainly a criteria that should be considered, but it should not be the only criteria considered, because leadership skill sets, soft skills with how to manage people and personalities and things like that are all equally, if not more important, for somebody who's in a leadership role. And consequently, we went through some tough times for a couple of years. We had some high turnover rates. We had some challenges with managing those types of interactions, right? Hey, you were late again for the 7th time. How do I handle this? And, what's your documentation look like? And we were in a retail environment. So we, when we got to the point where we were hundreds of employees, I remember we were using a PEO, to be clear. And we switched from the first PEO to the second PEO. And it was like, I won't say night and day difference, because I don't want to knock the original PEO that we used. They were good, but the second one was definitely had more resources available to them. And as we scaled from 30 or 40 stores to when we got to 60, 80, 100, 120, 140 stores, it was substantially, I couldn't tell you how important it was to have a resource like that. As an executive director, I had at one point had 9 sales directors and an operational director. And then we had, I think my team was like 450, 475 employees. You got that many employees, you're guaranteed you're going to have HR issues on a regular basis. And how those things are handled are super important. And the bigger you get, I don't want to say the more you become a target for potential frivolous lawsuits, but it's true. And so what we really, if we didn't have that resource in place, and like a director would call me and say, okay, we had, this employee's hanging out with this employee, and they shouldn't be hanging out. They work in the same store together, right? We got those kind of issues. It's a sensitive topic. How do you approach the subject? what can you say? What can you not say? To David's point early on in the early days, it was what What's our interview process look like? And what are we saying? What should we not be saying? How do we clean up that? Then it was that. So that was the basic stuff. And then we evolved into how do we actually get a better interview process, right? How do we evolve that interview process to bring in better candidates that are better suited for our company or our culture, things like that. That PEO didn't play up all of that, but they definitely played an initial role in helping manage all those initial challenges and those basic conversations that we were having. And then having a legal representative available to us was super important because you had just such a large organization. So to your point, having somebody to call up and say, hey, I'm dealing with this. What are some suggestions for me? Because to your point, you go and Google that and you could get 1,000 different answers. And none of them could be appropriate for your specific situation.
Or good.
Exactly. So, yeah, and when you can, I don't believe that you can grow a sizable organization with any reasonable number of employees without having those types of resources in place. You know, if it's an HR director for 50 employees, and I look at, I think, you know, a sweet spot for your business, I would guess would be, I say retail, but even I would say restaurants are in that same group, right? It's like, because they deal with a ton of turnover, right? They're constantly turning over employees, and they're bringing them in. They don't necessarily have good new hire processes. They don't necessarily have good documentation of the records. And so having a payroll system that manages that for them is substantially, I couldn't tell you how valuable that could potentially be for the small businesses, because again, it's not their wheelhouse.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And it to your point too, it depends on the size of the business, right? A lot of these, like around restaurants anyway, a lot of times they can be part of these restaurant groups where they own, 20, 30 restaurants. So,
sure, absolutely.
That's kind of a different beast all in itself. But then you're talking about some of these mom and pops where they might have 10, 15, 20 employees that, John and Jane are trying to manage and run the payroll and do the marketing and do all this stuff. And, they have an incident between two employees and they don't know how to handle it. And so they need help with guidance going through that. And, we'll be honest too, if something comes up, even with our HR compliance package where you have a dedicated HR person, they'll say, you need to talk to an attorney. Like this is beyond us. It's time to.
Right. Yep. You've elevated. You need professional advice. And that's helpful too, because, for the average small business owner, that's actually one of their biggest concerns is if I have to engage a lawyer at $300, $400, $500 an hour, that could be substantially challenging. Right. So it's like, okay, well, at what point should I get a lawyer involved? And having that resource, the resource that your company provides, that would be super valuable as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because then at least you get the good advice that says, okay, well, this is something that you can do on your own, and here's how you should handle it, or we would recommend handling it. Because, again, at the end of the day, the business owner needs to make the decision. But, we will definitely be open and honest and say, look, this is something you need to talk to an attorney about. We cannot advise you on this particular topic.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, Eric, you didn't want to say something earlier that I'll say, but the bigger you get, the bigger the target is, right? People see those bigger and the growing companies as a cash cow, and if all of a sudden you start to get one or two maybe unlawful terminations, you get attorneys that are going to go after you, and they're going to seek out every negative review on Glassdoor and try to connect with that person and try to figure out what happened and how can I get some money out of this. And so I would say absolutely you have to take that perspective that the bigger your business gets, the bigger the target is. So I think that's well said, or not said, Eric, but alluded to. Figured I'd just drive it home for you. And then Chris, I think what I appreciate what I'm hearing you say is really that additional perspective. And so often, myself, Eric, and I'm sure you as well, when you're working with clients, find that small business owners, they don't always have somebody to bounce ideas off of or to get alternative perspectives. And, they're so used to kind of holding the business together, holding the team together, trying to do it all, wearing all the hats that you talked about, that they don't always have, that second perspective or better perspective on some of these issues that it sounds like PayEntry can provide.
Yeah, it's tunnel vision, right? Like when you're trying to wear all those hats, you get stuck like thinking very literally, right? And you can't really zoom out and look at the bigger picture because you're so stressed and you're focused on these issues that come up one at a time, or sometimes all at the same time. You have this perfect trifecta of all this stuff happening. And so it's nice to be able to like zoom back and reach out to your partners and say, hey, look, I'm having trouble with my books, and I'm going to talk to my accountant or my bookkeeper and have them work on this. I have more questions about my payroll. I'm going to reach out to my client advocate and say, okay, I need this report because I don't really understand where some of my money is going as far as payroll is concerned. How can I solve this? I have had this issue between two of my employees. I need some help with that. Or I need some help with benefits or retirement. And, to be able to have those types of people to be able to reach out to is invaluable, because now you can kind of zoom out and you can relieve some of that stress onto other people, so you can focus and be able to breathe. And again, zoom out and look at that bigger picture of your business and where you want it to be.
Right. Yeah. One other thing I'll say about PayEntry is that, and I know other payroll companies do something similar, but the point, well, one, I want to give you guys a plug, because Chris and I, when we first met last summer, I think it was, for the first time.
Last summer, yeah.
Yeah. So over time, we built a relationship, and one of the conversations, I don't know if Chris, you've actually mentioned it, but one of your target audience is actually the solopreneur.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is the individual business owner. So the individual business owner generally thinks, oh, I don't need to take a salary, right? Or I don't need to do my books and give myself a designated salary. And that's actually a bad thing, because the commingling of funds, I say necessarily commingling, but pulling money out when you can to pay your bills is actually a terrible practice as a business owner. What you really need to do is agree to, sit down with your spouse and say, hey, look, I can draw $3,000 a month right now. That's what I can take as a compensation, and then back into what that dollar amount is after taxes, right? So it's $3,500, whatever that number is, and that's what you draw as a salary, and you pay yourself that salary, right? One of the things we teach our clients is you do need to pay yourself first, because if you don't, what will happen is there's always a need in the business for that money, and you will go spend it on something else, and then it creates all kinds of financial problems at home. So developing and taking a specific designated salary for yourself actually helps alleviate some of those financial challenges that come with not taking a designated salary from the business. So employing a service like that is super important. I try and encourage all my clients to really kind of understand, hey, I understand it doesn't sound like it's a challenge because you just take it when it's available or when you need it or whatever. But the reality is, if you learn to budget more effectively, then you don't have that angst or anxiety that comes with not knowing, when the business can afford to pay me, and I can actually manage around that budget and then go from there. But that's just one of the things I wanted to say. The other thing I was going to say is that, as I mentioned, when Chris and I got to know each other a little bit better, he actually went so far as doing his president and the VP of sales were actually coming to town, and he took the opportunity to actually invite me to sit down with them and meet with them. And I really liked the approach. I love them as individuals, as people. I really like Chris. That's why we've been talking. And I'm an advocate of their services, but getting to meet those individuals and hear their culture and understand more about their culture and how they run their organization just indoctrinated me. This is the kind of company I want to support, and I want to help endorse. But so I appreciate that, Chris, and I wanted to make that out there. I would put that out there because I certainly see the value and appreciate the way you handled that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to that story, right? Why we are what we are. Do I have time to kind of throw out that quick story?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so PayEntry was actually founded in 1994 under the name of MPay, and we had this software that we licensed out called Millennium. And so we were licensing the software to people that wanted to provide payroll services, but not actually have to develop their own software to do so, because that could be really expensive and time consuming. So we just were licensing out our software. So for 25 years, we had the opportunity to kind of sit back and watch the market and see how end users were being treated by their providers, right? So we literally sat down and made a list of everything that we hated about payroll, right? Like oh my gosh, terrible customer service, right? 1-800 numbers, you're on hold for 45 minutes or an hour. You might get somebody, you might not. You might get some help, you might not. It's always a crapshoot when you're trying to get help. You email somebody, you might hear back,
3 days
2 weeks later. Yeah, 3 days later. And by then your payroll's late and your employees are mad, right? So
Right.
that's not super helpful. And then, they would sell their product a la carte. So, what can I afford? I can afford timekeeping and payroll, but I can't afford hiring and onboarding. So I'll just have to figure it out and kind of go from there.
Right.
And then confusing pricing structures, right? What am I paying for? Well, what's this fee for? What's that fee for? W-2 fees, end of year fees, tax filing fees, all these fees that just kind of pop up. So we literally made this list and we started checking stuff off. What did we want to do? How did we want to do it? Because we wanted to do things totally different than what anybody else was doing. And the first thing that we said was, look, we really want to have good customer service. So every client, no matter their size, whether the solopreneur or our largest client is 13,000 employees, they have a dedicated client advocate that they can reach out to with any kind of questions, help, or whatever they need. And that's a direct phone number and a direct email address to that client advocate. So they can say, hey, look, I'm dedicated to Erica. I have Erica's phone number. I have Erica's email address. I can reach out and get answers in a real timely manner. I mean, we're talking same day. And then we wanted to include everything in our service. So hiring and onboarding, unlimited job postings, unlimited new hire reporting, timekeeping, payroll, unlimited payroll. So it doesn't matter how often you're paying your employees, whether it's monthly, semi-monthly, every other week, weekly, daily, it doesn't matter to us. The price doesn't change. And then we didn't want to have any hidden fees. So there's no charges for those custom reports, no charges for quarterly filings, annual filings, W-2s, none of that stuff. So there's no extra charges. So, and that's kind of circling back to what I was saying earlier, is now you can predict, right? Okay, I know exactly what my bill is going to be on a monthly basis, what it's going to be on an annual basis. And if I hire 5 more employees, I know exactly what I'm going to pay for those five more employees by the end of the year. And that's really what we wanted to do, is to make it, again, simple, predictable, and transparent, right? Another plug, right? But we really just wanted to make sure that when we're working with our partners, that they understand how things work, so they can reiterate that out to their clients as well and say, this is everything that you get for this price.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that philosophy. I love that strategy. I think that's a big piece. Again, going back to that, the average small business owner, let's assume less than 50 employees, which I know is kind of your sweet spot, right? Most of them don't have the resources to manage all that. And so when they have a service like yours that can help them manage all of that at one set or designated price, it allows them to budget accordingly. They're not worried about, hey, like when you first explained to me that you could do payroll twice a month and then run yet another like commission run on a different day, or you could pay your 1099 employees, on the 1st and the 15th, and you could pay your regular payroll every 2 weeks as you ideally they would like to get paid. No difference, right? That's pretty substantial, right? And it just allows the flexibility to do what's right for that business.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it allows them, it's one less thing that they have to worry about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think just maybe one other topic I wanted to dive in to with you, Chris, while we've got you. I think it was interesting. We're talking about, that 3-day lag time, the employees get upset. One of the biggest contributors to, first 30-day turnover is inaccuracy of the first paycheck. And so, you take that out to 90 days, 6 months. I mean, if people's pay is wrong, you're going to lose employees. It's really what it comes down to. So I think the accuracy is important, but that kind of got me thinking, maybe some other retention strategies for employees. So if we're going to pay right, let's solve that problem, check that box. But any other kind of retention advice? We're kind of coming out of the headlines, right? The Great Resignation. Now I've heard it called the Great Regret. And so we're still trying to retain our employees. How can PayEntry help with that?
I think, well, like you said, it's having that dependability and making sure that their paychecks are right every single time, but offering those extra benefits outside of it helps a lot, right? Being able to provide 401k, whether you're matching or not, that's totally fine. But having it there is something that I think means a lot to people. And then having that actual support to be able to back it up too, because our benefits areas, both, retirement and health insurance, you have somebody directly to be able to reach out to. You're going to get a person, right? There's no queue, there's no 1-800 numbers. You're going to have somebody to reach out to get that help. And I think that's what people like, right? Is the fact that you're going to be able to offer them those benefits for their families, right? You hire somebody on and they have 2 toddlers like I do, benefits is going to be huge for me, especially if it's affordable benefits. Retirement, that's going to be huge for me. And again, I think employees are starting to get more and more savvy about these things and understanding it more often. That employers need to start thinking about that for that retention side of it and being able to keep that good talent. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. And it's something that I think a lot of business owners don't spend enough time thinking about, right? They're thinking about, the product, the service, customer acquisition, marketing, maybe not thinking about, what happens if I lost my top 2 people tomorrow and what am I doing to retain them? So I love the perspective on that. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. It's like, what happens if your top salesman were to leave tomorrow because you messed up his commission check? What's going to happen to you?
Happens all the time. Yeah.
Happens all the time. Or you wouldn't be able to fix that problem in a timely manner. Oh man, I've seen it in over and over and over again. People just leaving because it's like, you didn't get my check right again. I'm out of here. I'm tired of fighting for it. And I don't want to wait 2 more weeks to get it on my next paycheck or get that adjustment.
Yep.
I need it now. And
when as an employer, you lose credibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If it happens once, okay. Happens twice, happens 3, 4, 5 times, it's like, no, I'm out of here. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just if there's anything I learned about managing salespeople over 25 years, and one thing you don't do is mess with people's money. I mean, it's always the case, but it's even more so in sales because, in our environments, often if they let's say, for instance, an employee made $60,000 to $80,000 a year, they were making like a third of it in base hourly or base salary, and the other 2/3 was typically in commission. So if you messed up their commission checks and you shorted them $500, they felt it. And it was real. And like I said, you do that 2 or 3 times and they're out.
It's really easy to do. I mean, I want to say it's really easy to lose employees. It's really easy to lose employees. It's only slightly harder to keep them. Only a little bit. Like it really just.
And one of the things I always said is when you lose employees, you're usually losing your better employees, because the ones that are willing to tolerate the less than desirable circumstances are the ones that are too lazy to go. And sorry if that offends people, but it's usually the people that are too lazy to go find another job.
Yeah.
So the reality is, at the end of the day, it's the good people you're going to lose to something like that because they know they're good enough to go somewhere else and get a better opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. The ones that are going to hang around through the tough times and tolerate the stuff that you let happen, they're the ones that you probably didn't necessarily want to hang around anyway.
Yeah.
Which is a really
they're the ones that usually come in and coast anyway. Like they're they're there 50% of the time mentally. So it's like, it's not too challenging to keep good people. I mean, keeping good culture, keeping benefits going. And good culture doesn't necessarily mean a pizza party every Friday. It means showing gratitude, and but that's a whole other conversation.
one we may have to have you back for. So
I'm down.
That's a show in itself.
Yeah,
exactly.
Cool. Well, hey, I want to make sure we got enough time at the end for just anything else you want to share on PayEntry. And Eric, I know My Biz Coaches has some cool stuff going on, so I want to make sure we have a few minutes for that. So let me jump to our key points. So really the first thing is ensure you have the right software and payroll partner. And if you're not sure, chances are you probably don't. So, check out PayEntry and check out some of the other partners out there, and make sure you've got the right software and the right partner to meet the needs of your business. Another important thing, learn about the potential liabilities in your state or even your industry regarding timekeeping, payroll, a lot of possible liability there. So you need to make sure you get that stuff right. Also, employee benefits doesn't have to be daunting. Work with someone who can help. Make sure you document and streamline your HR policies and processes. And if you're not sure where to start, talk to somebody who can walk you through it and give you that additional perspective. And then make sure you build a retention strategy into your business practices as well. So with that, 3 action items, things that, if you're listening right now wondering where do I start, first is evaluate how happy you are with your current scheduling and payroll process. So on a scale from 1 to 10, if you're not an 8 or higher, I'd say, give Chris a call, figure out, what you can do to improve that process. Second thing is I'd say create a list of your HR headaches. So just, blank sheet of paper, start writing them out, and then prioritize that list and begin researching solutions and partners that can help you solve those problems. So even if you just solve those first 3, I bet your life, your stress would be so much better if you could find a solution for that. There's a lot of great people out there who can help, like Chris and the PayEntry team. So with that, Chris, anything else you want to share about PayEntry, or maybe more about PayEntry Next Gen?
Oh, gosh. Just give me a call. Let's have a conversation. Can't hurt to have a conversation, right? If you haven't shopped in a while, I talk to people that have been with somebody for 30 years. It's like, okay, well, you need to at least have a conversation, right? I get that you're happy, but if you're still paying, $14,000 a year more than you should be, let's have a conversation, right? You don't know what you don't know, especially after 30 years. But especially if you're just getting started, let's talk options, right? What can we do to help? What do you want? What do you want to offer? How do you want to do it? What's your timelines? I'm happy to have a conversation.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks. Appreciate it, Chris. Eric, let's talk about My Biz Coaches. You had an event this week, and you've got an event coming up, and I know you got a lot of stuff going on over there. So I'd love to give you a chance to spotlight some of those new things.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate that. So thanks to Chris. He came out and supported us yesterday at the event. We were a vendor at the expo, the Phoenix Metro Chamber Expo. There were 40-ish. It was right around 40 different vendors that were at the event. It was actually a really good turnout for us. I know that I'm going to say they had well over 300 people going through there over the course of the 5 hours, 6 hours, whatever it was that we were there. About 5.5 hours, I think. But definitely it was a good turnout. Lots of quality conversations. I'm going to say we had at least 15, maybe closer to 20 total conversations. About a third of those were really good high-level conversations that will lead to follow-up appointments. Another third were people that would consider coming in with some of our group coaching programs. We rolled out a new promotion yesterday, David, as you know, our normal $297 price point for group coaching for every other client. If you're a member of one of the networking groups that we associate with, we're offering that for $97. So it's a way for us to endorse our partnerships with those who support us. And I'm excited about maybe they'll make that announcement and bring some people in, the opportunity for them to test out our services, see what we can do. And then the other thing was, as you mentioned, we get a big event coming up in April, which Chris is actually taking part in that as well. He'll be one of the 8 speakers at the event. They'll be giving us more insight on Painless Payroll, and I'm sure some other items as well. So we're super excited.
Yeah.
Yeah, super excited about the support and looking forward to the event. But we've got 8 total speakers. The flyer will probably go out this weekend, and we'll promote it and get it out there. David, I'll have to talk to you about how we can get it on the channel here, so we can make it available for people to get on the for the show. Absolutely. But super excited. We're expecting about 100 people total for the event, and we're starting at the base price for that is $197 for the 2 days. We have a CEO of a bank. We have a 9-time best-selling author who's going to be there. Has also happened to do 37 years as a tax attorney. That'll give us some tax advice. So lots of really good people are going to come out and talk about their specific topics of business. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity for anybody who has a business or is considering getting into a business to come out, learn more, and decide and figure out a good partnership relationship with some of these key people to help them grow and scale their business.
Fantastic. Well, sounds like a great event. Yeah, and Eric, I'll definitely make sure we get that plugged in to the show for future episodes. And on that note, make sure you don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes with great guests just like Chris and other important announcements. So be sure to subscribe on YouTube or your podcast player of choice. Chris, thanks so much for spending time with us today. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This has been fun.
Awesome. Yeah, likewise. Eric, always good to hang out with you. Have a good one.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Awesome. Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Bye, guys.